Among the people of Kazakhstan, there's an ancient tradition of raising eagles. Besides their use in hunting, eagles are regarded as symbolic protectors. From a vantage point high in the sky, the eagles watch over the ancestral homeland of the Kazakhs. As April the 12th, 1961 dawned, a young man took off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Tyuratam. For the first time ever, a human being would soar higher than the eagles. The young man was Yuri Gagarin, and he was about to fulfill mankind's dream of traveling in space. When Gagarin gazed down on Earth through the porthole of his spacecraft, he became the first human ever to see his home from space. What met his gaze was a mysterious, crystal blue planet with continents that looked like little boats on the vast oceans. What Gagarin could not see was the Gazat River in his Soviet homeland. Nor could he see another great river, this one created by humans. Below his Vostok spacecraft, as it flew over China, people were battling to transform the hills and rivers. On the Hanjiang River, the longest tributary of the Yangtze, 100,000 Chinese people were building a giant dam. 2,500 meters long and 162 meters high, it was designed to prevent flooding, generate power, and irrigate farmland. A wise ruler controls the rivers first. The leaders of the People's Republic knew it was vital to protect the population from flooding and drought. And so, in 1950, work began to harness the Huaihe River, reinforce the dikes on the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, and build a flood diversion facility on the Jinghe River. At Danjiangkou, the largest water conservancy project in China was launched. Throughout history, the rise and fall of civilizations has been associated with water. In November 2013, with the smoke of war still lingering, our film crew arrives in Iraq. It is here that they will begin their investigation into civilizations that have flourished on water. The site of ancient Babylon has scarcely received any visitors since the Gulf War. And no living person has ever seen the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It was here that 5,000 years ago, Mesopotamian civilization flourished. The name Mesopotamia means between two rivers. It takes a day, heading northwest along the river Euphrates, to reach the ancient city of Eridu. Established 7,000 years ago at the mouth of the Persian Gulf and 125 kilometers from modern-day Baghdad, Eridu was the first city in human history. And it was built on water. In Sumerian mythology, Eridu was created by the water god Enki. The belief was that the waters on which Eridu stood were the source of all life.
If you think that 60% of the body is water and 70% of the brain is water and even 80% of the blood is water, you can say water is life. So water is really a very important resource. It's without water, everything is nothing.
Like the Sumerians, the ancient Egyptians established their civilization on the river that flowed through their midst. The Nile, by flooding every year between July and November, nourished the dry land and left fertile soil behind. The Ganges, with its source in the Himalayas, is at the heart of a watershed that covers a quarter of India's territory. The river that gave birth to the brilliant Ganges civilization is, still today, regarded by Indians as their sacred mother river. Gravitating towards water was basically the earliest pattern of human settlement. Whether the Nile in Egypt or the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in the east, the world's great ancient civilizations were nurtured by rivers.
As you look back throughout history, you'll see, first of all, that communities establish themselves where there's water. A flowing river, you will find communities who will establish themselves. And that's why there's so many cities around the world which are built on or around water.
Human history has been a process of exploiting water. In 1987, archaeologists working at the Hemul period site on the lower reaches of the Yangtze found 150 tons of ancient rice. Scientific analysis of the carbonized rice has shown that it was cultivated 7,000 years ago. The discovery proves that China was the first country in the world where rice was grown. The archaeologists also discovered wells at the Hemul site. Linked to the paddy fields, ditches and ponds, they formed part of an irrigation system that promoted the growth of not only crops, but also the human population. As their communities grew larger, people were obliged to establish their homes and reclaim arable land further and further away from the rivers. But still they needed water, so they began building aqueducts to transfer river water to where they were living. At Anfengtang in Shou County, Anhui Province, an ancient water storage facility can still be seen. It was built by Sun Shu'ao, Prime Minister of Chu, during the spring and autumn period, nearly 3,000 years ago. The oldest known lowland reservoir in human history, it still irrigates 62,000 hectares of farmland today. Canals, wells and ponds were the earliest means by which humans harnessed water. In the course of harnessing water, humans developed their wisdom and gave birth to civilization. Around the world, just as in China, human progress has been linked to water. In the 1940s, British researchers found a trove of clay tablets among the ruins of ancient Babylon. The tablets were inscribed with cuneiform script. A study revealed that the inscription on one of the tablets was a 6,000-year-old mathematical formula for calculating the runoff from a canal. Using such formulae, the ancient Babylonians built a network of canals linking the most important cities from the Persian Gulf to Mesopotamia. This irrigation system transformed vast tracts of wasteland into fertile fields, and thus civilization took another step forward. While the Babylonian Empire was flourishing thanks to its water conservancy projects, in Western China a small remote state was taking the first steps towards unifying the country. Under the Qin dynasty, China's long period of division would be ended, and for the first time, the country would be a single, multinational state. 2,200 years ago, under Qin, a governor of the southwestern Shu region, Li Bing, supervised the construction of a unique irrigation system. Dujiangyan is the oldest surviving water conservancy project in the world. Still today, it serves to irrigate nearly 700,000 hectares and nourishes the western Sichuan plain. The Dujiangyan engineers pioneered a groundbreaking method of diverting water without a dam. In 1872, a German visitor was heard to comment, as he stood in front of the so-called fish-mouth levee, that, as a perfect means of irrigation, Dujiangyan had no rival anywhere in the world. The German was Ferdinand von Richthofen, known as the father of modern geography. Von Richthofen travelled to China 7 times in the second half of the 19th century. And it was he who located the dried-up lakebed of Lop Nur in Xinjiang. 1,600 years before, a splendid kingdom called Lowland had flourished here in Xinjiang's northwestern corner. But with time, the local river changed course, and the expanding desert wiped out lowland civilization.
Theoreticians of history and culture say that big cultures evolve and collapse because they are unable to deal with water problems. And there are ample evidence in history that some countries collapsed because of drought or other water-related problems.
10 years after Li Bing completed the Dujiangyan project, work began on a canal on the central Shanxi plain. The Zhongguo Canal, 150 kilometers long, took over 10 years to complete. By diverting the Jinghe River eastward into the Luohe River, it helped irrigate over 250,000 hectares of farmland. Sima Qian, in his Records of the Grand Historian, wrote, "Central Shanxi has enjoyed fertile fields and seen no bad years since then. Thus Qin became rich and strong before it conquered other states." In this way, water conservancy projects helped Qin conquer its 6 rival states and become the first powerful Chinese empire. Water was essential to the ancient agricultural civilizations and could decide the rise and fall of states. In the early 7th century, under the Sui dynasty, millions of peasants were recruited to build the Tongji and Hangou canals, which would ultimately become part of the famous Grand Canal. 2,700 kilometers long, the Grand Canal linked the Yangtze, Huaihe, Yellow and Haihe rivers to form a north-south thoroughfare of water. Still today, the Grand Canal plays an essential role in the economic life of eastern China. In its early days, over 300 million tons of cargo were transported along it each year, accelerating the exchange between northern and southern China and ultimately ushering in the golden age of the Tang dynasty. By linking the Yangtze, Huaihe, Yellow and Weihe rivers, the Grand Canal became a grain shipping lifeline between Yangzhou and the Tang capital, Chang'an. The ancient line, with 10,000 yuan in pocket, flying to Yangzhou on a crane, describes the city's wealth at the time. The Grand Canal brought vast riches to the cities along its banks, and Yangzhou at its southern end rose to become the most prosperous city in the east of the Tang Empire. In ancient times, water was the lifeblood of a nation. The chains of canals, channels and aqueducts, the dams and locks radiating across the Chinese Empire nurtured a developed agricultural society. They also supported the shipping trade and encouraged the integration and unification of a multiracial society. The rivers, by nourishing human beings, kept alive their civilizations. However, the human demand for water was insatiable. Once plentiful and easily found, water started becoming scarce and costly. People became complacent, never imagining that the spectre of dehydration would one day threaten them. Two-thirds of the Earth's surface is oceans, and 97% of its water is seawater. Just 2.53% is freshwater, and most of this meager reserve is ice, frozen in the Antarctic and in mountain glaciers. Humans are able to access just 0.007% of the Earth's freshwater supplies, the proverbial drop in the ocean. Of this precious freshwater, 60% of it is found in just 9 countries, including Brazil, Russia, and Canada. World Water Council data shows that roughly half of the world's more than 200 countries regularly suffer from water shortages. Among them, 28 are classified as dehydrated.
if you look into the world map and you realize that from Western China till Western Africa, you have a huge dry belt of the world where people, some several 100 million people live, and a tiny portion of the renewable water resources of the world is available.
At the end of November 2013, our film crew arrives in the home of another ancient civilization, India. The country is covered with pump wells and water channels. Thanks to them, India is the world's most irrigated country and its third biggest grain producer. However, of India's 27 million pump wells, many can now only pump up salt water, or nothing at all. In sub-Saharan Africa, there are 450 million people without access to clean drinking water. 12 countries are suffering from a chronic water shortage, and 25% of the arable land has been reduced to desert because of the lack of water.
Without water, the development sectors are going to be in big trouble, because water is key to all aspects of development across the sectors.
The scarcity and uneven distribution of water have been the cause of numerous crises. The predatory exploitation and the pollution of water are frustrating human development and, worse still, becoming the cause of war. In March 2001, Kofi Annan, Secretary General of the UN at the time, said at a meeting, "The fierce competition for fresh water is very likely to cause conflicts and wars in the future." In fact, wars over water had been fought long before then. Over 4,500 years ago, Eannatum, king of Lagash on the Mesopotamian plain, fought a war with the neighbouring country of Umma. The cause of the conflict was irrigation rights. The stele of vultures, which is today housed in the Louvre in Paris, describes a battle fought during that war. 45 centuries later, in June 1967, Israel sent her air force to secure control of the Golan Heights and the entire course of the River Jordan. Israel at the time depended on the Jordan for 40% of her daily water needs. So, seizing the water sources on the Golan Heights was seen as an important strategic objective.
21世纪都在抢水，水不够，水资源是影响一个我们国家社会经济发展的大问题。
The scarcity of water is becoming an explosive issue in the geopolitical arena. Cross-border rivers such as the Nile, the Niger, and the Indus have already been focuses of dispute among countries and regions.
到2025年的时候呢，这个预测国际上预测水危机要普遍的出现，在世界上比较大的范围内。
Behind the visible conflicts, a hidden battle over water is quietly developing. In March 2008, Professor Tony Allen of King's College, University of London, was awarded the Stockholm Water Prize. The award was in recognition of his research on water use, particularly his development of the concept of virtual water. Few people are aware of how much water they consume every day. One person consumes about 3 litres of drinking water and almost 200 litres for domestic purposes on a daily basis. But this is only the surface. We use much more water through the products and services we also consume on a daily basis. This is virtual water. production of a computer chip weighing just 2 grams uses 32 kilos of water. Growing a kilogram of wheat uses 1 ton of water. And the production of a pair of denim jeans uses 6 tons. And that of a pound of coffee, 10 tons of water. Even a kilo of beef accounts for 15 to 30 tons of water. This is the scale of the water consumed in the course of the production and sale of consumer goods and food. The concept of virtual water has a major impact on global trade policy. Some countries and regions have realized that water can be traded as a commodity. Although Japan and the EU do not lack water, they still prefer to import grain and consumer goods from the developing countries as a means of preserving their own freshwater stocks. Consequently, the equivalent of several dozen rivers are shipped around the world every year. China has nearly a quarter of the world's rivers. Half a century ago, work began on the Danjiang Coal Reservoir, which would be the largest freshwater reserve in Asia. Although the shadow of dehydration does not seem to be a threat as yet, history shows us that we should not be complacent. The Great Wall is a symbol of Chinese civilization. This magnificent wall extends from Liaodong Bay in the east to Hexi Desert in the west. Historically, it has separated farming and nomadic civilizations. A mean annual rainfall map of China has a line on it that cuts diagonally across northern China, roughly following the Great Wall from the greater Xing'an Mountains in the northeast to the Yin and Helan Mountains in the northwest. The line is the 400mm isohyet dividing China's semi-humid and semi-arid regions. In other words, the precipitation within the Great Wall is higher than it is outside. This rainfall pattern is caused by the continental monsoon climate, and it has influenced the development of Chinese civilization for the past 5,000 years. Throughout the country's history, wars have been fought between the farming and nomadic civilizations, triggered by the uneven rainfall and the consequential effects on crop harvests and livestock farming.
The north of China faces a very serious challenge because of the climate and the situation of the country. Most of the rain falls in the summer over a few short months, between 70% and 90% in the far northeast in just 2 months of the summer. This is a very serious problem for the management of water in those areas.
The fact is that China's problem with water is the uneven distribution of resources. The Yangtze River Valley and the area south of it account for 36.5% of China's land area, but own 81% of its water resources. The area north of the Yangtze, with 63.5% of the territory, has just 19% of the water. This 19% of the water nourishes 46% of the country's population and generates 45% of its GDP. China's water resources per capita are just 1/4 of the world average. 9 of the cities and provinces in northern China, including Beijing, Tianjin, Shandong, Henan and Hebei, record per capita water resources that are significantly below the 500 cubic meters annually that is the internationally recognized warning line for water exhaustion. Incredibly, the average water availability in Beijing is now less than 100 cubic meters per capita. If the average person in the world had 1 glass of water, each Chinese person would have just a quarter of a glass. As for the average Beijinger, he or she would have just 1/88th of a glass to drink.
We know that globally there is a water crisis, but China is facing a deeper water crisis, mostly because of its very fast development, industrial development, but also for the incredible pace of urbanization.
The photograph was taken by Jiang Chunli of the Research Office under the Yellow River Affairs Bureau in Jianhua County. It shows the dried up Yellow River.
当地有的老百姓他就吃这个地沟里的雨水。我当时看到一个老农在吃这样的水，我当时心里也不是滋味，我就把它拍下来了。
From February the 6th, 1997 to January the 1st, 1998, this section of the Yellow River was completely dry. For 226 days, a stretch of river 720 kilometers long failed to send a single drop of water to the sea. That there is more water in the south than the north is the basic pattern of water distribution in China. It gave rise to a history of water management that strove to heighten the water's benefits whilst reducing the harm that it did. People have always managed to use their wisdom to influence nature. From the ancient past until today, from east to west, human beings have altered river courses in order to obtain water and survive. Since the start of the industrial age in particular, large-scale water transfer has been a scientific approach to promoting human civilization.
Now, the question is, when you approach water transfer problems, in this regard is a question whether you bring water to the people or people to the water. And technologically, bringing water to the people is actually easier than bringing people to the water. Now, this has both a very positive
from the very start. Stating my intention to give you every piece of my heart, all your love.
In August 2013, our crew arrives in the United States, home to the world's first modern water project. It has served as an example for many other countries in developing their own long-distance water transfer projects. China is one of them. Los Angeles, 100 years ago. In 1850, Los Angeles had a population of just 1,600. Half a century later, its population was over 100,000. Facing such rapid expansion, the local groundwater could no longer meet demand. So, Los Angeles turned for its water to Owens Valley, 400 kilometers away. The Los Angeles Aqueduct project took 100,000 people 5 years to complete. The project involved building a 360-kilometer long aqueduct and an 84-kilometer long tunnel. With Los Angeles continuing to expand, in 1970, another aqueduct was added to the system, this one 220 kilometers long. These two routes channel 700 million cubic meters of water into the city each year. The plentiful water supply has helped promote the city's development and prosperity. Today, it's a leading international metropolis and the entertainment center of the world. Israel's scarcity of water is even more severe than China's. Rolling deserts form much of the landscape. Two-thirds of the land area is arid, and the long summer lasts for 6 months every year. Israel's average rainfall is less than 200 millimeters a year. In the southern desert region, it's as little as 30 millimeters. In 1953, Israel launched a groundbreaking water project. It began fetching fresh water from Lake Galilee and transferring it southward to the Negev desert.
Well, Israel has a unique situation where we consume double the amount of the rainwater in Israel. Moreover, half of Israel is desert. There's no water there. So Israel, from its very inception, faced a very challenging situation where we had to make water.
Israel's water diversion projects have not only made more water available to more people, but also improved the country's once harsh ecological environment. Vast expanses of desert have been turned into oases. An agricultural population of less than 3% of the national total feeds the whole country and even exports large quantities of produce to Europe and America. Israel's success in developing water projects under such difficult conditions has been followed by many other countries. It has also served as a model for China in her major water transfer projects. In the 20th century, more than 40 countries and regions built in excess of 350 water diversion projects. The total volume of diverted water involved equals half the annual runoff of the Yangtze River. Water transfer projects can be seen from the Nile in Africa to the Amazon in South America, from the Danube in Europe to the Great Lakes in North America. A search through recent Chinese history reveals that in 1908, when the Los Angeles Aqueduct project was launched, a merchant named Wang Xiaojia was building the first hydropower station in China. It would use water from Lake Dianchi in the Kunming suburbs. The Shilongba power station has been supplying electric power and irrigation water to Kunming and the surrounding areas since 1912. Water diversion is a scientific method adopted by mankind to allocate water resources more reasonably. It is essential today in maintaining sustainable development under the pressing situation of a worldwide water shortage. The leaders of the People's Republic have consistently guided and encouraged the Chinese people in constructing major water projects. 2014, China's Tiangong space station circumnavigated the Earth at the same latitude as Yuri Gagarin did 50 years before. Down below, the people had bid farewell to the era of shoulder poles. Now, the largest water diversion project in the world was being carried out. Starting from Danjiangkou in Hubei and Jiangdu in Jiangsu province, a vast water network would be created with 4 horizontal and 3 vertical channels. It would become the most spectacular water system on Earth. It was China's grand south-to-north water diversion project. For 12 years, hundreds of thousands of builders from more than 1,000 construction companies would work on the project. They would dig up 16 billion cubic meters of mud and rock and use 43 million cubic meters of concrete. The equivalent of building 100 bridges over the Yangtze, the project would give rise to numerous world engineering firsts. Facing the reality of a 50 billion cubic meter water supply shortfall and over 100 million thirsty people, what prospects did this water network hold out? Would the dry rivers, lakes and growing desert be revitalized by a gurgling network of water? What would happen to the nearly 350,000 people who would have to be relocated to make way for the project? Would a civilization, historically nurtured by large rivers, regain her vitality, her wisdom and her creativity, helped by the new water network laid across the heartland of her culture? Life and water are vital for continuing reproduction. The torrent of river water flowing from south to north carries with it not only a solution to a historical water crisis, but also an ancient nation's dream of revival.